Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started in a few moments. We're just going to give folks a little bit more time to get in from the rain and the traffic. But while we wait, if you could please fill out those photo release forms. They have the label Smithsonian at the top, and you can hold them at your table. We'll grab them towards the end of the program. Thank you again for being here. Welcome you on behalf of the Harvey Gantt Center. My name is Afeni Grace. I'm the Public Programs Manager. And as always, it's an honor and pleasure to have you here. I know it's raining, so thank you for taking the time to come out and participate in this conversation. So you are here for Community of Change Beyond the Game. So just to give you a bit of background, we have partnered the Gantt Center and the Levine Museum of the New South. Shout out to Patrick and Alex who are joining me in this program. We have partnered with them to bring this amazing exhibition to the Gantt called Men of Change. This exhibition celebrates Black men who have had impact in our country and beyond. And so as a result of this exhibition, we have created programs that celebrates this exhibition, particularly our Community of Change programming. You are here for the second installment. Tonight, we are inspired by Muhammad Ali and LeBron James, who are our two men of change in the exhibition, to discuss the intersection and the impact of Black male athletes and their journeys, their experiences, their perspectives. The difference between a typical panel conversation is, as I've told my volunteer, Kimberly, is that it is not that. It is not a panel conversation. You all are the panel. So we are expecting and uplifting your voices in this program. You'll see that we have some questions here at the table that we'll get to, but you will be the main contributors. Please keep in mind that you are being streamed live virtually. We do have a virtual audience here with us tonight. So anytime that you want to share and speak, please just wait until you receive a mic. We have several mics kind of going around. Our two facilitators will be passing mics as well. So we want to make sure that your voice is heard, and you'll need a mic for that, okay? All right. So I am happy to introduce our two facilitators for tonight, two incredible individuals who have worked really closely with me to contribute some great content for the discussion. I'll start with Miss Raina L. Cash. Raina, can you join me, please? Thank you, Raina, for being here. Raina is the executive director of the Charlotte Observer, executive editor of the Charlotte Observer. She most recently led the Savannah Morning News as executive editor and state director for Gantt, Georgia's markets. Before, Cash served as executive sports editor of the Louisville Courier-Journal. She previously worked for Charlotte-based Sporting News and other publications such as the Dallas Morning News and the Miami Herald. Cash is a native of Sanford, Florida, and graduate of Florida A&M University, where she's a recipient of the Thelma T. Gorham Distinguished Alumni Award. Cash is a graduate of the Stanford University Black Executive Leadership Program and a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. She's passionate about leadership and mentoring young journalists, and I'm sure that's most of the reason why she's here with us this evening. Thank you, Ms. Raina. I'd also like to introduce our lead facilitator for this evening, Mr. Doug Middleton. Just a bit of information about Doug. He's from Winston-Salem. He attended Appalachian State, where he was an all-conference and all-American safety. Also, two-time graduate of App State with degrees in political science and a master's in public administration. He spent 6 seasons in the NFL with the New York Jets, Jacksonville Jaguars, among others, from 2016 to 2022. Doug founded the Impossible Foundation to bring more awareness to mental health with student athletes and youth. He currently lives in Waxhaw, North Carolina. Please give Doug another hand. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our two facilitators. You're in for a treat for tonight. Please be open and generate some discussion with us. Again, a shout out to Levine Museum of the New South. Thank y'all for being here.
Great. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. Definitely a lot of metrics to overcome to get here, but I definitely appreciate you all showing up to be a part of this great conversation. Ms. Raina here, we've had a great outlook on sports from two different point of views. Myself being an athlete, Ms. Raina being able to cover sports for so long and really cover a lot of great athletes, cover some great teams, and really cover some great stories and missions. And so when we had this conversation, wanted to put this conversation tonight together, it's not really about only our opinions. It's more about you all's opinions. Like Afeni said, the goal of this night is really to amplify your voice and give you a way to share your thoughts and give you a platform. I think over, just looking at some of our best athletes, when we look at Kyrie Irving, when we look at LeBron James, when we look at just plenty of athletes that have really learned how to use their voice as an athlete and their platform to really step up for causes that we all may feel passionate about but may not be able to have a huge voice. And so tonight is your opportunity to share your voice on some of these tough topics. When we started to think about this exhibit and two of the athletes that are really key, what inspired men of change. We talk about Muhammad Ali. Ms. Raina has that Muhammad Ali shirt on. Show him that shirt. Tell him you was a little swagged out today.
Feeling good.
Yeah. So Muhammad Ali, could you tell him a little bit about Muhammad Ali?
I mean, he's the GOAT, right? Muhammad Ali, the greatest, not just the greatest fighter, but his contributions to America, to the world, to our culture, to Black America. It's really all-encompassing, both as for his courage, his ability in the ring, his voice, his influence. You can argue that he might be in athletic circles the greatest man of change that we've ever seen. He was a fighter no matter where he went, right up until his last breath as he battled with Parkinson's before he passed away. He is the people's champ. I wasn't in Louisville at the time of his passing. I went just like a year or two later, but I've read a lot about that period and how they covered. And you can go even now to his burial spot in Louisville, and people come and visit it like a shrine. But they ran behind the limousine carrying his body, the hearse carrying his body. People jogged and threw flowers and just gave him the ultimate send-off. And it was well-deserved because if he was of course we'll get into it, being a conscientious objector to the draft, to the Vietnam War, and all that cost him. So we can't say enough about what he has done for America.
Yeah, I would love to read this quote by Muhammad Ali. He says, "When you saw me in the boxing ring fighting, it wasn't just so I could beat my opponent. My fighting had a purpose. I had to be successful in order to get people to listen to the things I had to say. I want to be a champion who is accessible to everyone. I hope to inspire others to take control of their lives and to live with pride and self-determination." So when I hear that quote right there, that's the first thing that comes to mind, people's champ.
Yeah.
And you talk about a person, who was able to use their platform as an athlete and really just amplify it by the way that they showed up day in and day out in the ring. So I would love just to start the conversation. Let's start it with Muhammad Ali. Just tell us some things that, any thoughts that you have on Muhammad Ali, some things that you remember about him, and some things that, maybe, you loved about what he did outside of the ring.
I think one thing that's kind of significant is he had a lot of decisions to make at such an early age. As you kind of see him maneuver through boxing and through his social justice causes and standings and things like that. I mean, sorry enter in so late, but just that idea of standing up to the Vietnam War, you just have to take, I stood in awe of the fact that just how young he was just to do that, make that type of stance.
That's a great point. Anybody else? You have one more?
I think about when he decided to change his name and his religion, especially in that time period. I was a little girl during that time period, growing up in the 60s and the 70s. And to become a Muslim in some communities across the United States, especially I can say for my community, we didn't know of Muslims and what it stood for because we were of a Christian background. Yeah. And when he joined the Muslim, I hate to say this until now that I truly understand it, becoming a grown woman, is that we looked upon the Muslim as a bad religion, and it wasn't understood even in the Black community.
Right.
So he had so much courage to stand no matter what for his belief and for whom he was, and that, says it all.
Love that. Love that.
You're absolutely right about the cultural difference. Right. Even though he was from Louisville, Kentucky, is Louisville the South or, but certainly a lot different than us in Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. It was about Dr. King at the time. he joined the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and all of that. That brought along with him, Malcolm X, and there was controversy with Muhammad Ali, but it was certainly larger than him, outside of him. But he was sort of almost the face in some ways of the faith, and even in the black community, that cost him. That cost him a lot until people came to understand what that faith motivated within him.
It's very interesting how, we view things that we really can't understand. Even though, we may not have been able to fully comprehend Muhammad Ali. Even though we weren't able to fully comprehend Muhammad Ali and his beliefs, there was. I think there was still a lot to admire. So our next athlete that we want to discuss, that's also part of the exhibit, is really my personal favorite, LeBron James. So this athlete right here, I remember watching LeBron James on ESPN when he hopped out of Hummer, and he was going to have the opportunity to go number 1 in the draft. And it was like he was just, he was the chosen one, if I could really describe it. He was just very athletic. And then, you follow his career and you look at him 20 years later, 22 years later in his playing career. I would say that he's defied all odds and he's actually gone way above expectations. And what I mean by that is not only with the play that he's had on the court, but with really a lot of the things that he's done off the court. You talk about a man who is a family man, and I don't know, what else is out there, but I haven't heard any blemish on his family. We talk about a philanthropist that's been able to start a school and send, hundreds of kids to college for free. We talk about an investor that's been able to invest in tons of startups and a lot of companies and give black founders, opportunities to be able to, chase their dreams. LeBron James is the epitome of what it means, I guess, for the black community to make it. I think he's, definitely earned his platform, he's earned his name, and he's done a lot for really all of us as a people. Is there anything that's pretty special to you all about LeBron James?
I admire the fact that he helped educate his close group of friends and teammates, because lots of times, somebody makes it big and then everybody else is still back in the community. And the fact that he helped them get educated and get good careers and professions, I think it speaks, a lot for him as well as these other families and generations to come. So.
I think at a time when many of the professional athletes were following the Michael Jordan model, where you don't say anything controversial, you don't say anything political, because Republicans buy shoes too. He stood up and to be counted when the tragedies of police brutality kicked in. He got his team, got the Say My Name t-shirts, put things out there, made personal stands, which probably cost him endorsements, cost him, some financial rewards, but helped revive the role of black athlete, advocate leaders that Muhammad Ali represented.
Doug, when I think of LeBron, one of the things that comes to my mind, being from Sanford, Florida, as you all heard earlier, where unfortunately Trayvon Martin was killed, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, among others, wearing the hoodie, that was so significant. And, there was there were people who accused him of being like exaggerating. You're a multi-million-dollar famous athlete. You would never be subjected to the same sort of treatment that Trayvon Martin faced. Or, you know, when people say that that could have been my son. Barack Obama said something like that. To recognize the power of his platform and use it boldly. Said a lot. Black Lives Matter even before or after Trayvon Martin. So it wasn't just a moment in time. That activism continued. Someone might remember the award ceremony when he and Dwayne Wade were standing up on stage together. What was it? Yeah.
Was Chris Paul with him too?
Chris Paul was there as well.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there was a time when today's modern athlete would not have done that.
Well, just going off of what you're saying, so like, you know, I've been playing sports. I got into the league in 2016, and, you know, being an undrafted free agent, playing on a few different teams, like being able to speak up the way LeBron James does, like I could never really imagine being able to say some of the things that he says. Number one, I was always, you know, very fearful of my job, right. You know, and so when you think about some of the things that he stood up for, it even connects me to a thought about Colin Kaepernick and the way that, you know, he was able to really, you know, fight for things that he believed in and really stand on that. But, you know, just my point of view, I just feel like he's the total image of a person, you know, that we all, as a young boy just growing up trying to be an athlete, that we all want to be like. And it had a lot to do with the fact that he had no problem with saying the things that, you know, that a lot of people couldn't really say. And still to this day, he's doing that. He talked about the Jerry Jones issue. He talked a little bit about Kyrie Irving. Would have liked to see him back Kyrie a little bit more, but you know, he did state a little bit with that. So yeah, LeBron James is we just named two huge players, you know, that have really contributed to the men of change. We define those two, Muhammad Ali, LeBron James, as two, you know, huge figures, and have been able to, you know, change a lot when it comes to our culture, when it comes to our society, and it comes to really just the way that we think about our athletes. The next question I have for you all, you know, as a group, you know, we think about these two athletes, and you know, we think about our community of change and beyond the game, and who, you know, just Muhammad Ali and LeBron James are. But are there any other athletes that really come to your mind? Any black male athletes that, you know, that are, you know, one of your favorites? And, you know, what is it about this person that makes them your favorite? Is it something that they do off the field? Is it the way that they play on the court, on the field? Is it the way that they're mixed in the culture? If you could just, you know, share one person that you like and explain the reason why.
For me, that would be Kyrie Irving, because he is a black man who is seeking knowledge about himself, and also what he does, you know, on the court, and also him giving back into the community.
I like that. Yeah, Kyrie. I mean, I can't even think about how much money he's donated over the past couple weeks. You know, and it's crazy the standards that us as black male athletes are held to. You look at Kyrie Irving with the repost on the clip that's on Amazon, but then they ask Amazon to take it down, and they get no response from that. And so, you know, Kyrie's, you know, held to a different standard at times, but he continuously bounces back with just more giving and more, you know, helping others, and like you said, is seeking education about himself, about who he is as a person. It's awesome. Anybody else? Let's try to get two more.
Your favorite athlete?
Favorite athlete? Just tell us why.
Okay, I would say one of my favorites, but I think my personal favorite, probably because I love football, would have to be Steve Smith. For several reasons. He's small, but in height, you know, or stature, but he's such a big person, a big personality, a lot of confidence, in himself and almost willed himself to become one of the best at his position. But also what he does off of the field, I have a lot of respect for him being vulnerable and speaking about his childhood growing up, experiencing domestic violence, in the home, seeing his mother have to go through that, and then giving back in the community and making resources available for those who may be going through the same thing. And also, most recently, trying to open up a mental health clinic because that's a great issue that a lot of us face, but particularly for Black men, it's so hard for them to seek out help, I would say, more so than others when they are probably needing it the most. And so for him to be an advocate for just people in general, but I think as a Black male, that'll do a lot to help him make that conversation and making that transition for them to be able to go and seek help a little bit easier.
I like that. I actually got a shirt on that says mentally healthy in it, and it has like men in parentheses just because of what you just said about men not wanting to open up, or men's mental health, especially Black men's mental health being just a totally different subject that's very hard to overcome at times. I couldn't go tonight without saying peace and prayers to DJ Twitch's family. We lost another Black man to suicide today, and just somebody that looks so happy and bubbly on the outside. And it seemed my dad called me, and he's like, man, I just don't get it. It looks like he has everything in life, and still for some reason, he's not at peace. And so you never know what somebody is going through. You never know what inner battle somebody may be battling, Black, white, whoever. Just be kind to people, and try to check on your loved ones, on your friends, and just try to be a blessing to somebody. Can we get a couple more athletes? Let's get two more. I'm gonna just go ahead. You got it.
So an athlete that comes to mind when it comes to like philanthropy, I would say Tyson Gay. I don't know if you guys know him. He's a track athlete, the 100 meter. Yeah. He actually just beat his PR, 9.7. But anyways, something that I really admire about him, I grew up in a boxing family, and like when 1964, I think, Muhammad Ali had, I think, won his first world title against, I can't think of his name, but he donated most of his money to charity to give it back. And that was my first time ever noticing like a athlete do that. And then obviously LeBron James giving 40 million, how much ever it was, for students to go to school for free. And Tyson Gay came to mind because, to go back to mental health, men, for some reason, it's just harder for men to deal with it and really cope and understand the strength of mental health and prioritizing that. And Tyson Gay honestly gave like a pillar for track athletes to kind of navigate through understanding their mental health, and I think that's super cool.
And then as his fellow track athlete, Noah Lyles, just coming off of the Olympics, spoke very openly about his struggles with his own mental health and the help that he has sought to kind of balance himself and get healthy and well. And just the strength that shows and the vulnerability to be able to do that, and how you never know who you're helping. You never know who's listening to a Noah Lyles or watching a Tyson Gay. So I appreciate that. As a fellow track person, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, y'all know I love mental health, so I'm not going to skip the convo. We're going to keep going into it. What do you all think is some of the reasons that men struggle? Why do you think men struggle in silence or don't open up? I would love to hear, some different opinions on that convo. Let's just go ahead and take it there.
Because number one, we start them off at a young age by saying, boys don't cry, toughen up. And so we already start when they're tots to hold that in and not be the human that they are.
Right here behind you.
I think it's also adding on to that is not having forums for conversations amongst your own circle. You know, I mean, I joked about this yesterday. I was like, you know, only type of conversation that I had amongst my male friends was, you know, playing the dozens, you know, shooting jokes. However, what we don't discuss or what we don't leave room for is the impact of that, right? We don't have, you know, some of those jokes kind of wear on to us depending on how that affects us, right? I think that's something now, as I've gotten older, me personally, is something that where I've been a strong advocate as recently to leave room for my male friends to say what they feel, speak what's on their mind. But I think that's something that's relatively new as we've evolved.
Like that. Can we get one more mail? Let's get older man. It's like one of you all share with us just your thoughts. I mean, I look at it from, you know, yeah, I would look.
I think sometimes for men as we get older, like for women, it's a little bit easier to have their social circles and their support system, where sometimes you can get isolated with your work or something that could preoccupy you. So it's kind of just taking a moment, pausing, leaning on your friends for help. They're going through some of the same things you are. Talk about that, be open about it the same way, and try to build those connections a little bit better, because sometimes you can feel really alone, but you always have to lean on someone. And I think it's a little bit easier for women to do that as they grow older, but for men it's a little tougher just with the way we create connections. And sometimes if we change jobs or something and work was our identity and then we find someone else, it can be difficult. So I think it's always finding your thing and people want to do the thing with you.
I think you made a great point. A lot of athletes, even myself, you know, we struggle with trying to find our identity outside of our job, outside of our career, outside of our sport. And so to be able to, you know, find people that are going through that same journey with us is very important, as you can lean on and, you know, with that immediate circle, with those people that you can be truly vulnerable with and honest with. I think that's how we, you know, get through it, is having a good support system. The next thing is knowing the resources. There is so many more resources that are out there within the last couple of years that are just beyond only therapy, you know, only medicine, you know, and I would challenge us to continue to look into that as far as what's available for us. There isn't, I mean, you even look at 988, you know, with the suicide hotline, it used to be such a complex number to remember, but now it's just easily as accessible as 911. And so when we look at, you know, where we are as a country right now coming out of COVID, it's very real. You know, it's a struggle for us all. You know, it's a battle for us all to overcome when we are so used to living life a certain way, and then we're, you know, kind of thrusted back out into the real world, back into the community. Like you said, just being accustomed to just kind of being in your own circle, in your own space, and not really having to have those conversations with people. So, yeah, I would just say just my only encouragement, just to, you know, continue to have that conversation is to give each other grace and give each other, like you said, room to have that conversation with people that we are truly, you know, in their circle. So when we talk about these athletes and we talk about some of the things that they've done and some of the things that they spoke up for, you know, we look at Colin Kaepernick and how he took a knee. We look at LeBron James and the rest of the basketball players, how they, you know, wore the T-shirt or wore the, you know, the different attire. Do you all feel that, you know, I'm trying to think who said this. It may have been President Trump, but do you all feel that the field or the court is the place for those athletes to be able to have those conversations, to really speak out? Is it on the, you know, on their job and workplace, or do those conversations need to happen other places?
Is that in the job description? Right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Is that in the job
Yeah,
description that
yeah.
you must also stand up for causes, you
Right.
must also fight against wrongs?
Yeah.
Or is that detrimental? This could cost you your job if
Yeah.
you do that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is the athlete's responsibility? Should they feel obligated And I
Yeah.
think that's a good word. Should they feel obligated to be a voice for certain issues, no matter what the issue is, LGBTQ issues, gun violence, you name it? Or is that asking too much? Is that expecting too much?
Yeah.
And is it different if you are the star of the team as opposed to the person sitting at the end of the bench?
Right. All right.
Or the person on the practice squad? Like, how much leverage do they have compared to some others? I think that's the question that you're
Yeah,
asking.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what is
for
the
sure.
obligation?
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody want to share?
You know, this is a good question related to, there's a book called $40 Million Slaves by William Roden. And it just reminds me, this whole conversation reminds me of that. And, it just kind of like, for me, the impression it left, it was like, me personally, I'm big on if it's something that you're passionate about and also knowledgeable about that you want to spread awareness to, go for it. But if you don't, and if you recognize that you don't, I'm not gonna persecute you for it, though. I think that there's I think now, even just going back to your question, wondering if the court or even the post game presser or halftime presser or things like that is the forum for that. And I think that there's no right way to approach it. It's just, if it's in your heart and you're knowledgeable about it, I think you should go for it. But I mean, we on the field or on the court or whatever the forum is that they're performing, we let them freely showcase their skills within the confines of the rules. But there's an unwritten rule of you don't have, that's it's not stated that you share your cause. But I mean, the NFL does a cause for cleats, and things like that. So I think that now, especially, there's room for that with the basketball court, where you're not wearing black and white shoes based on your uniform anymore. But I think that my overall point is, I think if you have it, if it's in you, you're knowledgeable about it, go for it. If you don't, there's no need to pressure anybody if they don't have it in them. But I think any time is best to share that. We may not be easy to receive it, but you can't hide what's on somebody's heart or mind.
Oh, okay. Can we have some and add to your comment too? If you can add this on the end, just give us an example of how that may have, sometimes that may have went good or sometimes that may have went bad for some of those athletes when they spoke up and used their platform to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the comment that if, you should be knowledgeable about whatever you speak on. And you should be, it's a cause that, you have some passion about. I wonder why the requirement is more, we put the requirement more on the athlete, and in particular the black athlete, when, whatever organization we work in, we could take that same type of stance, right? Or we could address certain kind of issues. And it brings me back to the psychologist Harry Edwards, who really, I think he was so much ahead of his time. He created a whole field of study, the sociology of sport. And you look at, part of that was around the 68 Olympic movement, those athletes were compelled to speak, and there was a lot of kind of, should we not, there was a lot of pressure that they had, but, things were so bad at that point in time in this country, but those athletes were compelled to speak, and you look at the price that they paid, John Carlos and Tommy Smith,
Right.
And that, some 50 plus years later, we can appreciate, the stance that they took. I guess your question was, should the athlete be outspoken, or should the athlete be required to? Is that part of the job description? I would agree that to the extent that that's your passion, to the extent that you're knowledgeable, you should do that. I grew up and Roberto Clemente caught my imagination. Okay, And, here was a black athlete, but a Hispanic athlete. And he was dealing with, the perspectives and attitudes that came to him. In Pittsburgh, they like to call him Bobby. He insisted on being called Roberto. When you look at how he lived his life and how he gave his life, for, supporting a cause. That's what he went about, doing. We've had these athletes that speak up, both, in the past and now. We talked about some of the, Chris Paul. I don't think Chris Paul's name came up. He's passionate, in that he supports young men, with his, his teams and all. So.
I want to ask specifically about if sporting events is an effective platform for like an appropriate platform for these types of kind of political statements. I think the issues are so absurd, right? That, like for example, Colin Kaepernick kneeling, right? Some people are like, this is not the platform. They would consider that almost absurd. But the issue that he is taking that kneeling for, it is absurd in itself. And so I think just to kind of throw this out there, I think we have a warped idea of what we consider appropriate and what we consider okay. And so as a result, I truly do think that it can be clearly a very effective platform, even if it can cost an athlete his career, his livelihood. But unfortunately, that's a part of the world that we live in.
I think you brought up a great point. It just feels like sometimes, I'm just be honest, it feels like sometimes athletes don't have a chance to really share their true opinions. We look at Micah Parsons. He hopped on Twitter and said one thing, and, he had to go in there and apologize. Has anybody heard what he said? Yeah. So last week he was on Twitter, and Brittany Griner, they made a trade for Brittany Griner, and he got on Twitter and said, Joe Biden, that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to vote for you, I think is what he said. And so he wasn't saying whether he was going to vote one way or the other, but it just doesn't mean that just because he brought Brittany Griner home, he automatically earned his vote. And so immediately after he said that, he received a ton of backlash. There's a lot of people all over him. And he had to come out and apologize for what he said. He had to apologize. And so you talk about an athlete that states his opinion and doesn't even go one way or the other on politics, regardless if he did or not, but he has to apologize just because of the scrutiny that he faces as an athlete. And so that brings up a conversation. I don't know if you want to touch on it, but that brings on a conversation. If we look at these people, we look at these, some of the most, biggest community leaders, the people with the biggest voices. If they don't say anything, who will? If they don't communicate those messages, if they don't speak out on those things, who will? Who else's voice will be heard, or who else's voice will at the end of the day be silenced? If we're seeing some people at the highest level voices are silent because of other things within the contracts of just the NFL or other platforms that they're not able to speak on, who else will have the opportunity to speak up? So name.
I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
But it just makes me wonder, like Muhammad Ali, he stood against the draft.
Yeah.
It cost him, but he didn't care. He stood on it. And just as you spoke of that young man spoke of his belief, and you said did he come out and apologize? Did he have publicists that say you need to apologize or such and such? Or could he just say, no, I'm standing on what I believe in? He has the right to vote or choose to vote who he want to vote for or not, Mm-hmm. So you say he came out and apologized. Should he apologize or not? If he meant what he said, then why would he apologize unless he had a publicist saying, you need to do this so-and-so? That's the only thing I can think of, that the reason why he might apologize.
Yeah, with the reason he might apologize. It's for sure probably a publicist told him, but there's this thing called like unspoken words. I would say when you look at, the NFL, myself being at the, being able to play at that level, and probably our friend Justin could touch on it too, but sometimes it feels like you can't really say what you want to say, and it's not anybody telling you can't say it. It's just more or less the consequences that are immediately behind you if you do choose to say something. And so it's kind of really hard to really detail that out. But you see a lot of players that that have a lot of education about these causes, have done their homework, have been able to build an effective platform, and then even once they've done that, they're still unable to kind of share what they truly feel. And maybe that's because they could potentially lose their career. Maybe it's because, I look at Kyrie Irving. Yeah, he said what he said, which was really nothing. All he did was repost a picture, and he almost lost his career after it. But then when you also look at Kyrie Irving and you look at some of the things that he was forced to do, those are some of the things that kind of happens behind the scenes. But then sometimes it's like, hey, you have to make this sacrifice so that you can get this money and so that you can bring up your people. Because like you said, Kyrie's your favorite athlete, right? Well, I mean, Kyrie Irving is giving away probably $1 million in the last week. He gives away so much money. But is he able to do that without that platform? Is he able to do that without that job? Is he able to do that, after he shares some of that information? So those are some of the things that goes into the equation when it's like, hey, I'm going to just come out and say whatever I want to say. Well, it's not as simple as that, because you tell me, and I'll ask you all this question. Is the goal, is the way to break down, not break down, but build up our people, our generation, is a better way to go out and speak on it? Or sometimes is it a better way to put that money and that energy and that time and effort behind it, like some of these athletes may do without that don't really speak on those topics sometimes?
Doug, isn't there, there might be something to be said. My mother always says, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And, Twitter, just as one example, is probably a very bad platform to express opinions on a very loaded issue. Unless you're one of these expert Twitter threaders. But most people are using limited characters to try and explain very complex and layered opinions about things. And there's some danger in that, I believe, and not putting things into context. There's what you said, and then there's all of the things that led to your opinion and what you hope comes out of expressing that opinion. And if you aren't afforded the opportunity, or you don't take the opportunity to put things, to state things more fully, to make sure that you're completely understood, then you run a risk of it being, someone taking and running
and
flipping your words. Or sometimes you are given that opportunity. Sometimes the mic is right in your face. You're standing at your locker room and, there's a swarm of reporters around you, for instance, or you're at a press table and the room is full. Imagine us being post-game right now and Doug and I are sitting at a table and the room is full of reporters and you're asked a question. You answer it thoughtfully, but it doesn't necessarily fit in a soundbite, or it doesn't make a neat and tidy quote. And so as a member of the media, we have a responsibility to be careful, to be accurate, and to be fair. And, so that's, I just think that's important to consider, that how you say things, when you say them, what platform, is it on the football field? If you do take a knee, then are you also making yourself available after the game, for instance, or are you just saying, I said what I wanted to say when I did what I did? And that leaves room for all kinds of misinterpretation and everything else.
Any other opinions on kind of all of that?
Yeah, I think when it, especially as we're speaking to the Kyrie topic on this one, and even Micah. Micah, there's a thing also. The NFL shields one part. Then he works for Jerry's World. Let's keep that honest here. So there's two elements where he's got to take into account. I mean, he's 24, so that's where you give him a little grace. But then the Kyrie thing, the Kyrie situation, it may seem like nothing, but you've got over 2 million followers, so that looks like promotion. And that video is that documentary is what, 2-3 hours worth of a lot of information. And who knows how that's fact checked. But what it does also look like is that he just got in trouble for something he didn't even watch. So, and I think that's something that he's got to take into consideration as well. And so if you just put something out just to what it looks like promotion, then yeah, as he says, he's called himself a grown man. I think that he should be able to explain to that, and I think there's room for that. But I do think that, hey, if there's questions, if you leave a question, I mean, leave room for a question, I think that, hey, I should be able to ask you for an answer. And if you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine. But I think that there's room for dialogue if you're putting something, hey, explain this, just out of curiosity, not. And I do think that there's something also there's a lack of media as far as him being represented in that room sometimes too. And I mean, by that, I think it's definitely improved in terms of black and different. We have different ethnicities that serve as media for the NBA, NFL, things like that. NFL kind of, but NBA most definitely. But yeah, I think just a little bit of a difference in
representation.
Representation
matters.
In that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did you have something? I think somebody else had something.
I think for athletes to speak at these major platforms, you think about the NFL, it's such a major organization that provides so much content and experience for a massive audience. It has to appeal to a massive audience. And when Kaepernick done that, when he did what he did, which I admire, I think a lot of time athletes should consider when they express. I feel like for a young man or anyone looking at an athlete express on the field, the court, wherever it is, I feel like their activist goes as far as speaking out. Like, I think people admire the fact that this athlete just spoke out instead of the political issue. And I think outside of the sport, I think that's where it really shows. That's where activism really, really influences others to do the same thing. So I think it's a time and a place for everything. And, if I was an athlete, if I was like an athlete, let's say if I was on the Spurs and I said something about racial injustice, I think my intention would be to eliminate some of the money, the revenue that the NBA is getting. Because I don't know how true this is, but at the time of Kaepernick, the NFL lost like upwards of $5-6 billion. And I think that was a true attack. And I don't think that's really talked about. And I feel like Kaepernick didn't really understand. I don't think that was his intention. So to kind of sum it all up, I feel like athletes should kind of do their activist work outside of, the office where they work.
I just had a question about, what the young man said, Micah Parsons. So, I mean, you've been in the locker room after a game or whatever. So if he had just been, saying that and like almost like a joke, to the teammates and not Twittered it, do you think it would even have, been an issue at all?
No, and I think that's the problem that we have. No, and I think that's the problem that we have, especially with Twitter. I opinion, because like you just said, it's a small picture and it's not the total, it's not the total story, and you really don't even have an opportunity to really respond back because it's so, few limited characters compared to, being in front of your locker and having someone being able to have a camera and a mic and you're able to say what you say. But, I don't think it would have been as big of a deal, if he had said that in some other capacity. But he said it on Twitter, and you know how that platform goes. So, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to sort of bring it full circle, I mean, I think that's why Muhammad Ali is the center of this conversation. I mean, he took a principled stand, and he gave up everything, and he knew he was doing it. And that's really different from everybody else we've been talking about here tonight. The man gave up his profession, he gave up his livelihood, he sacrificed his freedom for that. I think it's not the same as so many of these other stories we're talking about. So I just want to call him out again, because he's a hero. He's an American hero for what he did, and very, very kind of remarkable human being that I think doesn't get enough recognition for that.
One thing I wanted to say is I think the past few years have created a new platform that is really great. I've listened to more podcasts, and I Am Athlete is really great for that, and it's all growing right now. I mean, they started out with 3 guys. I think it was Fred Taylor and Ryan Clark and Channing Crowder, and now they've got LaShawn McCoy, Brandon Marshall. They keep growing. Like, I don't, they have so many people on this podcast now that everyone wants to do it. And it's a little bit easier because they're away from the game. They're retired, so they can speak their mind a little bit. But people really connect with that, and they have their own forum to really have long conversations and think about things, and things that challenge them while they were playing as athletes, things that challenge them now. But it's a really good forum, and then there's more of those that have come up. Ryan Khalil has one now that he interviews players to get in their head and what are the issues, and he brings in different guests. And I think Russell Wilson is having one too, because there's been some misunderstanding about what his mindset might be. But it's for him to like have thoughtful crafting of this and getting other people's opinions is very helpful. So I think there's going to be more platforms like this. There's also a good one with Larry Fitzgerald and Tom Brady that's on now. That's, again, they might be misunderstood on some levels, but they clear the record and they can speak their mind, and they can deliver the message the way they want versus someone else controlling it and outside of their team environment. So,
love that. I know we got a lot of comments. We're going to get to this next. I'm sure y'all have the same comments on this one. So let's just, for the sake of time, I do want to get to these next couple questions before we get in our small group sessions. So we talked about platforms. We talked about, doing things at a large scale. We talked about how these athletes are using, the NFL, the NBA to really, state their mind. I want to play this video from Jackson State. And this is a 1974 football team. Ms. Randy, you could talk more about, what the video is, but just go.
So this was prompted by the name that is on everyone's lips today, Deion Sanders, right? And did he save HBCU sports? Did he save Jackson State? And about his decision, whether he was about going to Colorado. Was he obligated? Did he have some sort of obligation or responsibility to Jackson State, to black people, to black college football, et cetera? And I just wanted to show this video to put into context that long before there was Deion Sanders, who, by the way, did not play at an HBCU, long before there was Deion Sanders, there was Jackson State. I'm going to call my friend Kendrick Marshall is here. Kendrick's like, oh no. Kendrick himself, as you see, has on a Jackson State cap. He works with me at the Charlotte Observer. He's one of our editors. And he wrote a great column recently, just this last week, I guess it was. And I just want to quote a little piece, Kendrick, out of your column. HBCUs were not a collective corpse before God apparently told Sanders to descend from his 100-acre ranch in Texas to Jackson, Mississippi, and breathe life into them. I thought that was pretty powerful. He's a great writer. So anyway, let's go ahead and play this. It's only a minute and 30 seconds long. Yeah. Thanks for watching this. We have a number of questions, and this, I'm not sure if this is one of the questions on the sheet or not, but this might be an appropriate time to ask the question about myself being an HBCU graduate, Florida A&M. Are there ways in which HBCUs are uniquely positioned to support and help black athletes than what they might get elsewhere? Consider the fact 40% of all black engineers are HBCU graduates. More black medical school applicants come from HBCUs than PWIs, predominantly white institutions. 50% of all black lawyers and 80% of all black judges studied at HBCUs. And from an athletic standpoint, only 1.6% of college football players on all levels make it onto a 53-man NFL roster, 1.6%. So it gives you some advantages going to a larger school, exposure, but it is certainly far from being a guaranteed ticket into the NFL. And so I just wanted to present that question to you, and let's have a conversation about it, about whether you think HBCUs in some ways are better positioned or uniquely positioned to help young black athletes.
The question you ask, and I'm a graduate of Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, okay, but the question you ask really speaks to what, in today's society, what do HBCUs give to the student coming in? Because the vast majority of those athletes are going to go out into society and become accountants and whatever. They're not going to go be pros. And the thing that I found back in that time, I was a freshman that year in high school, in college. During that time frame, so I'm at Morgan State, okay? Now my wife here is at the Big White U, University of North Carolina. Okay, we get to calling back and forth, and I'm having one experience, she's having a totally different one. So, and then running it forward, I wound up being a junior ROTC instructor at a high school here, and as a senior instructor, you spend a lot of your time counseling kids to their next step. A small amount of them are going to the military, most of them are going to college or whatever. And the thing that you wind up telling them, and this applies to athletes or non-athletes, is it's not the glitz, it's not all the multi-million dollar facilities, it's the relationships that you want to establish. If you want to go somewhere where those instructors have chosen to work with, to mentor people who look like you will find the majority of them at HBCUs, okay? And, so the athlete, the HBCU is huge in the embrace, in providing a protected area for you to find a voice. And looking at our example, I was at the heart of my school. I was able to make a difference in student governance. I was able to be mentored. My professors found jobs for me. My wife, contrary, definitely smarter than I am, was, at the periphery of her school, and did not have those relationships. So yes, those athletes, is it the best trained to get you into the NFL? Maybe not. But is the best trained to get you where you need to go in life? It is.
During the time period that I was in college, and that was at the mid-'70s, HCPUs, mostly a lot of the black athletes that I met, and I didn't go to a black college, the ones that did come to our colleges saying that that was the only way that they could be chosen to get into college is through their athlete scholarship was to black colleges, whereas the bigger colleges were not choosing them. And some would come in, and I went to college with a couple guys that went into the NFL and to the NBA. I know a couple guys, and they transferred in from out of small black colleges, but when they were coming out of high school, they did not get chosen to go to the bigger schools. So thank God for the HCBUs, for people like, that had gotten chosen to go on into the NFL. But they might have wanted to go to some of the bigger schools, but they were not chosen.
Right, sure.
And I think too, gentleman over here was talking about the relationships, and I think that's ideal. I mean, I think, especially when you talk in NFL, I mean, the constant conversation is around black head coaches in the NFL. Black head coaches in the NFL, what's the pipeline look like? But then you also think about it like that with HBCUs. What's the connection from a coaching perspective to the NFL? What does that look like? Who do they have in touch with? Because I mean, the Power 5 schools, they, depending on how your success is, you've got that relationship. I mean, you even got somebody. I mean, I think that's the part about this when we talk about Deion Sanders. I mean, yeah, technically, yeah, he's an outsider. He is. He went to Florida State, so he is an outsider. But however, he's got a connection into the NFL that was unlike before. Even though you've got Tennessee State's Eddie George, Heisman Trophy winner out of Ohio State, but that's another piece where it's a connection to the NFL that some HBCUs may not have had before. And that's where you're starting to kind of see, I think, is where you're seeing guys that I grew up watching coming in if they choose to coach and stepping into that HBCU realm to give back.
Yeah, so I'm going to give the other side of it because, of course, I love HBCUs, but I want to give a different opinion. So I want to say, 2020 or 2021, not sure the year, but there were 0 guys from HBCU that were drafted. And so when we look at that stat, we look at guys who, may be coming out and trying to choose like the kid, the number 1 recruit did. He chose Jackson State over all the other, major Division I schools. But you start to look at what resources and support system, are available for our athletes. Like I'm on a lot of calls. I work with a lot of student athletes in their mental health, and one of the kids that I work with is at A&T. And while a lot of these schools are very comparative, when you talk about the alumni, you talk about, what the football program is just, being able to play football. But when you look at the support staff, you look at the number of support staff that a HBCU might have, you look at the facilities that the HBCU might have, those are things that still have to be able to close the gap. And so even when you talk about that pipeline of coaches that have came, from the NFL, African-American coaches who may have, went to PWIs compared to the number that may have went to HBCUs and just really trying to establish a true platform for our athletes. I mean, those are some of the things that's going into that decision-making process when you're trying to choose between a school like the University of Oklahoma or, a school like Prairie View. So just want to encompass the whole entire picture and kind of think about that even in leading us into the Deion Sanders conversation. Let's go ahead and just jump in it. But, we know Deion Sanders didn't come and save HBCUs. Oh, go ahead.
Before you jump into
go ahead. I'm going to let you,
Because, your column and what you put up here and your question, without a doubt, HBCUs, have made a lot of students. A lot of students wouldn't have got into college but for going to an HBCU, and they embraced the HBCU as well as it being embracing them, and they felt like they owned it. The fundamental thing about sports, it is a business, and it has changed over time. Jackson State and Grambling in that period were so popular that 2 years before that, they sold out Yankee Stadium. The next year, they came to Cleveland, Ohio, and sold out. I saw that Jackson State team, and they sold it out. The modern-day NFL, if you recall, there was the NFL and the AFL. HBCUs made the AFL. Al Davis recruited heavily from, HBCUs. Those three Hall of Famers, you could add to it Jerry Rice, add to it Donnie Shell, add to it, so many different players. And it forced, the NFL to have to, recognize. And it is referred to in that book that you talked about, $40 Million Slaves. So the HBCU, Florida A&M had one of the best business schools, has one of the best business schools in the country. When I got out of school and went to Dallas, there were so many students that came from Florida and A&M. Sylvia, I forget her name, but she was legendary in terms of being
the dean of the school.
Being a dean of the school.
Yeah.
Let me make one last point too, and to your point, with all due respect. Okay, everything you said about Muhammad Ali is true, but again, I mentioned Tommy Smith, John Carlos. One person that we don't talk about that changed the game of baseball. You see these Kurt Flood. When you talk about, these were people that sacrificed. Really. And the thing about it is that again, sports is a business, and you've heard the term they made a business decision. Mm-hmm. Well, Kurt, Muhammad Ali, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, a lot of them made these decisions and they paid for it. They really did pay, and they suffered. And we look at them today and we revere them. Time caught up. Same thing with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was despised at one time, and then in 1996 he's lighting the Olympic flame. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot there. Yeah. There's a lot there. I want to say that before you got into the.
Can we talk about that business decision with Muhammad Ali and that slide after we get to if there's another comment? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I'm trying to figure this out. Okay, so from Muhammad Ali, and then you have LeBron James. You have that gap. So you have the Michael Jordans that didn't say anything. So you have Muhammad Ali, there's the gap, then you have LeBron James. So there was a fail there where these athletes are not speaking up. And then you skip over it, and then all of a sudden we've got it generating
not-
again.
I'm not gonna say it was a fail. I just think those are just the two athletes that we're talking about.
Well, no, I'm just looking at
Okay,
like
got
the highlights
Okay.
that were coming out at that time. So I was looking at, just trying to figure out their age, their background, and then of course, like he said, NFL, AFC, the HBCUs having these men there, they realize they're losing money. They can make money if we pull these from the schools, the HBCUs, and put them into the PWIs.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm just trying to figure this all out. Like, so I see that gap, and then okay, they come in and say, "Let's get this. We can make money off of them again." So I don't know.
I think you're talking about like kind of like the quiet period, what felt like the quiet period, not just in athletics,
But in the world, in
the country, right? Like when we think about that activism gap, if you will, like who were the people, and since we're in the context of sports, like who were the people in the 70s and 80s and early 90s who were comfortable with taking a stand, and what were they fighting against? What was the fight?
I don't know what year it happened, but in the 60s and 70s, a lot of these athletes, they didn't make a lot of money, and they had to work in off season. And also, the NBA today, there was a time when the NBA, the finals weren't even on primetime TV. They were reruns. So it's changed in that regard. And one of the things that helped black athletes in the NBA was the 2013 strike. And when they went out on strike, the league shut down. Well, these players went around the country and were holding charity games and selling out gyms. And they realized, again, it's a business. So they realized they had the agency. So when they came back to the bargaining table, they realized what kind of power they had. You think about it. What other group of athletes has gotten an owner kicked out? Okay? Yeah. So when you talk about going from Muhammad Ali, and you think about, there was a meeting in Cleveland. You guys might have talked about it. It was Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, and Jim Brown,
that's our
and all
next
that.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about, to today, and LeBron James and Chris Paul, they've got, they've literally said to the league, if you don't get rid of this owner, we're not going to play.
Right.
And look, but see, in football, you got 15 guys on a NBA team. You got 53. Right. And you made reference to the fact you were very honest, and I think that's real. We have to recognize that. Is that it's tougher to do that in football. Not unless the top guys say, hey, look, we got to take a stand, and for you, this number 50, 52, 53, we're going to cover you, okay? And we'll make sure that you still are able to keep your job. And that's the difference.
Well, you're hitting at a great point. During that time, the revenue in these sports leagues have tremendously jumped over the years. I mean, the NFL is at, $15 billion in revenue, over the next year. And who knows what that number was back in 1990, nothing even close. And so you're right, there is a tremendous amount of change that's happened in this country, in our sports, that have influenced the way that our athletes have platforms. And then the next thing that you talked about is unity. The unity of being able to maybe unify in the NBA compared to the NFL. I mean, we just went through this 2 years ago when we had the CBA collective bargaining agreement renegotiations, and a lot of guys, saw the CBA two different ways. Some guys may have saw it as like, hey, let's go ahead and sign this. I'm not willing to maybe sacrifice and sit out time and miss checks to be able to get more. And there's some guys that say, hey, look, I'm in it for the long haul. If this is going to be, for the betterment of the future players that participate in this league, then I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And so that's two different opinions. And I mean, it's just like America with politics, you know. It's like, you know, we all have to come together and have one, you know, we all have individually one vote. But at the end of the day, it's only one person in each seat that wins. And so to be able to, you know, unify in that capacity when we are all seeing the world in so many different views. I always kind of, you know, try to compare the NFL to the real world because that's what it is. I mean, you got on the team that's making practice squad maybe a couple $1,000s a week, and you got a guy that's, you know, maybe the highest paid player in the NFL that's making $1 million a week. You know, so that's, I mean, you talk about a variety of America sitting right there in the locker room. I mean, that's really what it is. And so to be able to unify and have one voice with that, or to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be able to sit by my brother and support him when, hey, you know, you making this type of money, and I got 2 kids at home, and I'm making this type of money. You know, and I have 2 kids at home, and I'm making this type of money. Those are conversations and sacrifices that might be different for everybody. And so just jumping into the Deion conversation, I know we probably all over the place with time and stuff, but the last one I just wanted to talk about with Deion, we talked about the HBCUs. I mean, if, you know, let me know, it's just asking opinions. Do you support Deion's decision to go to Colorado? Do you have any issues with it? Just, you know, just your viewpoint.
Yeah, as Randall pointed out, I did write a column about it, but this is a very nuanced conversation, this entire thing, especially relates to Deion Sanders. I'm an alum of the school. I was very excited when he was named head coach. Just looking forward to the wild ride we're going to be put on, however long he stayed. It was only 2.5 years. But, yeah, people call him like a sellout and like a traitor. Like, I don't think he's a sellout, but I think initially when he came in to Jackson State, he made some overtures about he was going to level the playing field. He was going to change the game. He was going to make it so where young black kids would consider black colleges first before considering North Carolina or NC State or some of these schools that we come to watch on Saturday afternoons. And then, like, he put in the work to do that for Jackson State. He got the more recruit in the country, Travis Hunter, to come to the school. He got another 4-star kid to come to the school. And then he went about his way of promoting black colleges, saying, like, we need to do more to help them. We need to invest more. The NFL need to step up to help kids get drafted. And so we're thinking, like, hey, like, this guy's in it for the long haul. He might not be Eddie Robinson and stay for, like, 40 years to be at Jackson State, but, like, a lot of people thought he was going to stay for more than 2.5. And so then when he goes to Colorado for $29 million, we see the video of him walking through their facilities, which is a $150 million facility. His eyes are big as light bulbs, looking at all the fancy things he's got to play with now. And to a lot of people, it was a betrayal. Like, once again, the best of us as black people are being used to help promote and enrich white people. And that's what kind of pissed people off. A lot of people wished him well. A lot of people thought like he did a lot of good for Jackson State, getting them exposure, generating revenue for the program. But at the same time, people felt like his larger mission that he himself said he was going to do wasn't completed. And so that's why a lot of people have these polarizing opinions about him.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it was a missed opportunity. He definitely, you know, gave the impression that he was going to elevate. But Deion is Deion. Deion, I mean, he was who we thought he was, right? And, you know, I thought he would stay until his son graduated, you know. But you got to give him credit for what he did. You know, he did bring that attention, but he did kind of make us all think that he was going to elevate, you know. And then the thing about it is that I don't think he could have attracted like another coach, like an Eddie George or whomever, to work, because Deion doesn't work like that, you know, from that standpoint. But yeah, I mean, and it's disappointing, and it's also disappointing in the aftermath because now there's back and forth, and I think it's gotten kind of, you know, ridiculous. But yeah, last point, and
yeah.
When you made a very good point, you know, about the range of pay on a team. You know, you could say that about any corporation. When you look at the guys that are up there, you have Bill Russell, you know, who was, you know, probably on championship number 8 or 9, and Bill Russell and Jim Brown, who went in, you know, he was in Hollywood at the time, and they were all they were really trying to convince Muhammad Ali. I think they were trying to convince him to just go into the draft or go into the Army do a short stint and get out. That's what they were trying to do. Kareem was still in college at the time. John Wooten was, he was a player on the Browns, but he wasn't making a bunch of money. So all those men, and then you got Carl Stokes, first black mayor there, just a range of economics, salary and ability to speak out, right, and ability to, to say whatever. I mean, you see Jim Brown is out front, and so he could say a lot and not have, and he had the agency, right, to do that. And I think the point that was made earlier is that some of these athletes that we're talking about, it's, they're not really sacrificing anything, it's a and we don't know the rationale of why they're taking the position that they're taking, because what is they trying to really advance,
About this photo, this was from 1967, called the Cleveland Summit. Some people refer to it as the Ali Summit, and there's been some misunderstanding about what was really happening here. This wasn't let's all come together and support Muhammad Ali. It wasn't that alone. That was part of it. He had recently joined the Nation of Islam, going from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. He held the world heavyweight title at this time, but because he was a conscientious objector to the draft, he was facing draft dodger status or draft dodger charges at that time. So there was a lot at stake for him personally, and the folks here were interested in large part because of money. It was a business meeting, really. The boxing promoter, Bob Arum, did I say it correctly? I get that. Arum. Yeah. Bob Arum. He owned Main Bout, which was a closed circuit television rights for these fights. And the more Muhammad Ali fought, the more he made money. And Jim Brown had a stake in that business as well, as did Elijah Muhammad's son. So there were financial interests, and they were trying to get Ali to enter the draft and just go around and do like exhibitions on the military bases, so that he wouldn't be sentenced and they would still be able to make money. There were a lot of athletes who stood to make, not a lot, but there were a few people who stood to make a lot of money if he continued to fight. There were also people in this group who had served in the military and did not necessarily feel comfortable with the idea of him not entering the draft at all. And some people felt like he was not being patriotic. And then there were those who did not support, as you mentioned earlier, the Nation of Islam. So there were a lot of different things driving people to this conversation here. And what we see here is the press conference that happened after the meeting had ended. And at this point, Muhammad Ali had not changed his mind. He was not going to change his mind. And he came out at the press conference and said, I don't know what you guys expected to hear, but nothing has changed. Bill Russell, see if I can. Bill Russell, there on the left, said after this meeting, and I quote, talking about Muhammad Ali, he has something I have never been able to attain and something very few people I know possess. He has an absolute and sincere faith. I'm not worried about Muhammad Ali. He is better equipped than anyone I know to withstand the trials in store for him. What I'm worried about is the rest of us. And I thought that was so powerful. And he did end up, getting getting sentenced, I guess, and getting his title stripped away and not being able to fight for 3-5 years or so after this happened. So it changed his whole life. But the 50th anniversary of this was just a couple of years ago, and so folks talk about what it represents, and just on the surface, without knowing that background, it looks like just a meeting of unity. Like, let's come out and support each other. And eventually they all did support Muhammad Ali, but that's not why they came to this meeting in the first place. So I always find the history of this quite fascinating.
So I really love some of the things you said, and then we're gonna get into your opinion. But just to bring it all back together, we're probably not gonna get into small groups. We'll probably just do this here. But one of the questions that I did have for the small groups that I'm gonna ask you all, that's gonna bring this all back together, is what do you think? We just talked about mental health. We talked about our athletes. We talked about being able to sacrifice. What are some of those things that those athletes had to overcome both physically and mentally to be able to make those sacrifices and speak on those topics that we're talking about? We talked about, the sacrifices that they may have had in their pockets in their career. But what do you think it looked like, mentally to be able to make those type of sacrifices and speak up on the things that they did, during the times that they did?
I think it's important to mention here that this was just a few years after Medgar Evers had been killed, the 16th Street bombing, church bombing, and the Montgomery to Selma, Bloody Sunday. Like, there was a lot going on in the country when this took place.
I would just say, first of all, you have to look at each one of these people as individuals. We don't know what kind of background they came from, the kind of trauma they may have experienced as they were growing up. And for a lot of them, became successful because they had a drive, to as a reaction to experiences they had or what they did or did not have, was in the way of parents and stuff like that. So first of all, each one of those are individuals, with a unique set of experiences that they're bringing, to their profession or their accomplishments and that type of thing. So that would just be a starting point,
I guess just to answer a little bit of your question, what are some of the things that not only that group of men, but other black male athletes have had to overcome? I watched a documentary maybe earlier this year about Doug Williams, who was the first, African American to play for a professional team in the NFL and win a Super Bowl. And at the time, for me growing up, they were Redskins then, because I'm from South Carolina, and so that was our team. It was either Dallas or them that you rooted for. We know it's the Commanders now. But, we were all excited and happy. I never forget watching that as a kid, the Super Bowl, and watching him win and thinking to have a whole stadium full of people, cheering for you, and just that feeling he was the first. And then in watching the documentary, I was so taken aback by the death threats that he got, the hateful letters that he received, even in the pursuit of that. And I'm thinking, can you imagine having to, and how he talked about how that affected him to this day, but he endured it and he had the fortitude to continue despite all of that was going on. And that just really kind of, again, took me aback, because I'm thinking, hey, this would be a great thing for anybody. All these people are cheering. Who cares what color he is? But I think in some ways, I think not knowing, in his case, of course, he sacrificed a lot of his mental health because of it. His psychological safety was sacrificed. His family's safety was sacrificed. And so, and not hearing about this and not being able to speak out about this, I think you can tie it in my opinion, to what goes on today, in that, all of this stuff, racism is still alive and well. It never went anywhere. But because of people's, maybe in his position, who, for the safety of his family, could not speak up about those things or feared for his own life, we thought that we were further along than we actually were. And so now, years later, and being able to reflect on that and feel comfortable and coming out and saying, hey, this happened to me, and letting other people know, to see that there's still more work to be done, and there are going to be other people who need to step up and speak out about things that we see that are happening now and that happened then. And so for me, back to an earlier question that you asked about, should you keep your personal opinions for athletes, just to yourself, or you keep your activism separate from you? Me personally, I could never do that. I have to walk in and be my authentic self. So I can't imagine being on a playing field. It's like going to work now. I can't be in a space where I'm not allowed to speak up and talk about issues that affect me, because regardless of what people may say and think, you see me, when you walk in the room, I'm a black woman. And so there are issues that I have to deal with daily for being a black woman. I have a black son that's 13 that runs track and plays football with locks. And when people, we know the negative stereotype that some people, not all, feel about that, but don't know that he's smart as a whip. He's a straight A student. And that's the way that he chose to wear his hair. And we had to have a family conversation about that, and stuck behind him and supported him in that. So I'm saying all that to say, people don't realize the sacrifices that do go into and that play into not only the black athlete, but their families in the decisions that they make for themselves and for their children and their families. And so I applaud anyone who stands up and speaks, out against things that are important to them or that are not right. John Lewis is one of my heroes. He's definitely a man of change on any day. And so that's somebody who I strongly is a personal hero of mine. And that's a personal belief and value for me. I could not be in a space, work, church, whatever, anywhere, and not be my authentic self and speak up for what I believe in.
Around here making good trouble, huh?
Yeah, I was going to give a round of applause for that. But, no, seriously, when I wanted to be an athlete when I was 6 years old, just wanted to be in the NFL, I didn't know that it would include having to speak out or do things or really share your opinion about different things. I just thought I just wanted to play football at the time. I think that was the original goal. But going through my career and seeing that, there are people out here that go through things and don't have a voice to really explain the things that they go through. And so throughout my career, I became a voice, an advocate for mental health, because there's a lot of people that suffer in silence and may not be able to share and speak on and share all the things that they feel. And so later on in my career, I started to realize the obligation that you're talking about, that we all, not only as athletes, but as people in this world, is that have an obligation to go after things that we're passionate about. And so when we're having these conversations, it's not just to talk about athletes. It's not just to talk about things that they had to overcome. It's not just to talk about things that they've accomplished in their own life. But the real conversation is about how can we take some of the things that they've had to overcome, that they've had to endure, and the things that they've been able to accomplish. How can we take the lessons that they've, learned through their battles, and how can we put that into practice in our own life? And how can we, obtain success through their stories and their own individual journeys? And so that's what this conversation has been about for me, is how can I look at this? How can I look at Muhammad Ali? How can I look at LeBron James and be the LeBron James of my community? And you all and your son, with his dreadlocks, being the Muhammad Ali of his community. I think that's what all of this really, channels back to. And that's, there's a lot of mental and physical components that go into that. All of these people that we're celebrating, all these people that we're discussing, some people celebrated them, but they did things in some really tough times where, they had to endure a lot. They had to endure a lot. It wasn't just a simple conversation where they just got in front of a mic and said how they feel. There was a lot of letters and a lot of hate that came after it. And now, in the time where social media, where everybody is so easily accessible, I feel like it's even, maybe the same, if not worse now, because now you can just log on your phone and see all the hate and all the comments just right there in front of your face. So I just want to think about that when we encompass in this entire conversation. But before we wrap it up and before we get to our virtual, I think you want to say something real quick just to add on. And
just a couple things. First off, thank you for that nugget on the photo, because that's something I did not know. It really had me thinking about the only two people that kind of didn't have a motive in this, and that's Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And it had me wondering, Kareem probably, he's not too far removed from changing his name, if I'm not mistaken. And then Bill Russell, who brought, I don't know how many championships he was on at this point, but he had 11 total, and he couldn't even reside in the city he was in because his house was vandalized. So those two pieces I think of as I think of some of the gentlemen, it's just like, all right, who's really supporting Muhammad Ali in this regard? And that's where I kind of left it at, because I was like, oh wow, knowing that. But then also to the Deion Sanders point, I think as much as the part where that he just wasn't gracious about it. He had to acquire his degree from Talladega University in order to coach in the first place, because he didn't finish at Florida State. And the NCAA created a rule called the Deion rule because he didn't go to class in '89 and played in the bowl game. So now full circle, he's got to acquire his degree so he can coach. And now he coaches at HBCU and then doesn't even finish his contract. That's me personally how I feel about that. I graduated. I'm a graduate from A&T. So at the very least, finish your contract. I mean, I would have been all right with just finishing the 4 years. That's me. That's what he signed off for, and that's what so whatever he committed to and how he was able to elevate Jackson State within that 4 years, I would have been perfectly fine with. But the fact that you weren't gracious about how you acquired your opportunity in the first place, that's the part that sits with me with Deion Sanders. And this is me coming as a person who grew up enjoying Deion Sanders. I enjoyed the boisterous play. I enjoyed the flashiness. But at the end of the day, I still think of him, I'm still thinking critically. He's not primetime to me anymore. I'm 38 years old. So you Deion Sanders, what are you standing on? He wanted to, but he didn't. Yeah, he wanted to coach at Florida State, but they weren't giving him a shot. Yeah, that's when God called him to Jackson State. But he had to get that degree at Talladega University first. But yeah, that's the part that sit with me on the Deion Sanders. So that's my final thoughts on those two pieces. Thank you.
So I want to give anybody any room for any final thoughts. If there's anything that's still on your heart that you want to share. Like the end of church, anything on your heart, go ahead. All hearts and minds.
Yeah, just talking about like what these athletes have to endure during the time in which they competed. You look at Muhammad Ali. In 1960, he wins the gold medal in Rome. He comes back to America, can't even eat at a restaurant that's not black owned. So Jackie Robinson is a great example of this, of an athlete being silenced from the get-go. He was told he couldn't speak out or speak up about the way he was treated at all. Despite all the racism he faced, discrimination he faced. He gets a home run for the Dodgers to win the pennant for them, and he has to walk home. He can't get a cab after the game. Just imagine that, how lonely he had to be. Like, he wins the pennant for the Dodgers. They go to the World Series, and, he can't get a ride from a white cab driver. They go, that's the history of the black person in America, not just for athletes, but anybody. I mean, there was a time when myself and Raina, we couldn't work in a newsroom. There wasn't a black-owned newsroom. But now we can. So it's athletes today, I think they get a lot of unfair criticism because for black people, there's always going to be just one of us who gets to lead something, a movement. Like Dr. King, Malcolm X, even Deion Sanders to a degree, Jackson State. There's always expectation on at least one person to lead us to the promised land. And no other racial group has to face that type of burden. And so, when we say Muhammad Ali, there's a gap in LeBron James, we have to realize that, a lot of this stuff was happening intentionally. Voices are being silenced intentionally, whether or not it's politically doing so or through economic means. every step of the way, like there's always an opportunity for us to be silenced. And so that's why social media, for all its faults and all its evils, I think, is one way athletes of today can have a voice to let people know that, hey, like, this is what's wrong with society, and this is how we can fix it.
We live in a racist society. Very few people, black people, have platforms. We don't have 150,000 Bill Gateses out there like they do. And unfortunately, these young 20-somethings who get on TV because of their athletic prowess, who develop a following because of their athletic prowess, who have devoted all of their creative energy, the tens and 20s and thousands of hours of practice to be skilled, are the ones who have this platform. And many of them, as someone else pointed out, may not have the wherewithal, haven't thought through the issues, because 24 hours, 24/7, 365, I've been thinking how to dribble that daggone ball, et cetera, have that platform. So what speaks to our condition in this society is the fact that we hope and depend so much on these young people to have put some concepts together that a lot of people don't put together until their 30s, 40s, later on, to be positive. That speaks to our lack of power in the society, that the expectation is there because they're some of the few voices that have the platform to make a difference anyway.
Any more final thoughts? What's the best way to get in touch? Well, first I want to thank anybody who joined virtually. Thank you for joining in on the conversation. But I want to thank each of you all for, just being courageous enough to speak out and have your voice today. And, I hope, that you all know that this was a safe space to really let out whatever whatever thoughts you have, opinions on this topic. And when we look at, beyond the game and, we look at these two people, we look at all the athletes that we've discussed today. Just going back to my final thought is, how do we, look at what they've had to endure both physically and mentally, and the things that they were able to accomplish, and how can we put that in practice in our own life? And so that's how I would like to end, is just think about that. Just don't think about these athletes in a way of, I love to watch them play, but think about everything that they've had to sacrifice and they had to endure. And as you all are going through your life and you're having to sacrifice and you have to endure, just know that there's a generation behind you that is going to benefit from that. So thank you, appreciate it.